Most people don't realize how fragmented their minds have become until they try to sit still with one meaningful task and feel an almost physical resistance rise up inside them. It's not laziness, and it's not a lack of intelligence. It's something deeper and more structural. Modern life has quietly trained the brain to crave interruption, novelty, and easy stimulation, and over time that training rewires how attention works. The result is a constant sense of busyness without real progress, movement without depth, and effort without satisfaction. The ability to focus deeply has become rare, and because it is rare, it has become powerful. The core idea begins with a hard truth. Focus is not a personality trait, and it is not something you are either born with or without. It is a skill that has been weakened by environment and habit, and like any skill, it can be rebuilt through deliberate effort. But rebuilding it requires understanding what focus actually is. Focus is not forcing yourself to work longer hours or grinding through tasks with sheer willpower. True focus is the ability to direct your attention voluntarily, hold it steady, and protect it from intrusion. It is a state where the mind stops scattering its energy and instead channels it toward one clear target. Distraction, on the other hand, is not just an external problem. Phones, notifications, emails, and noise are only triggers. The deeper issue is internal restlessness. The mind has been conditioned to seek escape whenever effort becomes uncomfortable. The moment boredom, uncertainty, or difficulty appears, attention looks for relief. This is why simply removing distractions rarely works for long. Even in a quiet room, the urge to check, switch, or wander returns. The battle for focus is therefore not against devices, but against the habit of mental avoidance. One of the most important shifts is recognizing that focus always has a cost. Deep concentration demands energy, patience, and emotional tolerance. When you focus intensely, you are denying your brain the small dopamine hits it gets from novelty. This denial feels uncomfortable at first, almost like withdrawal. Many people misinterpret this discomfort as a sign that something is wrong, when in reality it is a sign that something important is happening. Focus feels heavy before it feels rewarding. The mind resists before it settles. This is why trying to transform your productivity overnight usually fails. The mind needs gradual retraining. Short, intentional periods of focus, done consistently, are far more powerful than rare bursts of extreme effort. When you sit down with a single task and commit to staying with it, even when the urge to escape arises, you are strengthening a mental muscle. Each time you resist distraction, you send a signal that attention can be controlled. Over time, that control becomes easier and more natural. Another key realization is that not all tasks deserve the same level of focus. Many people exhaust themselves by trying to treat everything as urgent and equally important. This leads to shallow work spread across too many obligations. High-level focus should be reserved for activities that truly move your life forward, the kind of work that compounds over time. Learning a valuable skill, building something meaningful, thinking deeply about strategy or direction, these are the areas where focus creates disproportionate results. When attention is scattered across trivial tasks, it gets wasted. Clarity plays a central role here. It is nearly impossible to focus when you don't know exactly what you are aiming at. Vague goals produce vague effort. The mind cannot lock onto an unclear target. Before deep focus can happen, there must be a clear decision about what matters most right now. This decision removes internal conflict. When you know that one task is your priority, distractions lose some of their power because they are no longer competing with uncertainty. The environment also shapes attention more than most people admit. Willpower is fragile, especially when constantly tested. A space filled with temptations invites distraction even if your intentions are strong. Designing your surroundings to support focus is not weakness, it is intelligence. Fewer visual distractions, fewer digital interruptions, and a predictable workspace reduce the number of decisions your brain has to make. Each decision drains mental energy. When energy is conserved, focus lasts longer. Equally important is understanding the relationship between focus and rest. A fatigued mind cannot concentrate deeply, no matter how disciplined you are. Sleep, physical movement, and mental downtime are not luxuries, they are prerequisites for sustained attention. There is also an emotional dimension to focus that often goes unnoticed. Avoidance of focus is sometimes avoidance of uncomfortable thoughts. When you slow down and concentrate, unresolved concerns, doubts, or fears can surface. Distraction becomes a way to escape from inner tension. Learning to focus therefore requires a certain emotional maturity, a willingness to sit with discomfort without immediately numbing it. This is one reason why deep focus can feel confronting. It strips away noise and leaves you alone with your thoughts. As focus improves, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. Time changes its texture. Hours spent in deep work feel shorter, yet more fulfilling. Progress becomes visible. Confidence grows not from external validation, but from knowing that you can rely on your own attention. This confidence spills into other areas of life. Decisions become clearer. Anxiety decreases. The mind feels less cluttered, less reactive. Focus also reshapes identity. When you repeatedly show up for meaningful work, even when motivation is low, you begin to see yourself differently. You are no longer someone who waits for inspiration. You become someone who acts with intention. This shift is quiet, but profound. It creates a sense of self-trust that cannot be faked. Yet this transformation does not happen in a straight line. There will be days when focus feels effortless and days when it feels impossible. This is normal. The mistake is expecting perfection. The goal is not to eliminate distraction forever, but to notice it sooner and return to what matters faster. Each return strengthens the habit. As attention becomes sharper, you may start to notice how much of the world is designed to pull you away from yourself. This awareness can feel unsettling, but it is also freeing. Once you see the mechanics of distraction, you are less controlled by them. You begin to choose your inputs more carefully, protect your mental space more fiercely, and value silence more deeply. This is where the idea of becoming almost ruthless with your attention begins to make sense, not in a harsh or aggressive way, but in a deliberate one. Attention is life's most precious resource. Where you place it determines what grows. Protecting it is an act of self-respect. As this understanding settles in, a deeper question starts to emerge. If focus is this powerful, if it can reshape work, identity, and inner peace, then what kind of life becomes possible when it is fully developed? The answer begins to unfold when discipline replaces impulse, and intention replaces noise, leading naturally into the next stage of mastery. At some point, once focus stops feeling like a struggle and starts feeling like a choice, a quieter realization sets in. The real challenge is no longer learning how to concentrate, but deciding what deserves that level of attention in the first place. This is where many people slip back into old patterns. They gain the ability to focus deeply, yet still apply it to the wrong things. Focus, when misdirected, can trap you just as easily as distraction. It can make you efficient at climbing the wrong ladder. The difference between meaningful focus and obsessive busyness lies in intention. Deep attention magnifies whatever it touches. If it's applied to trivial goals, it amplifies trivial outcomes. If it's applied to shallow validation or endless optimization, it deepens those loops. This is why clarity of values becomes inseparable from mastery of focus. Without an internal compass, the mind may work hard but never feel fulfilled. True focus works best when it is aligned with something that matters beyond immediate reward. One of the most subtle enemies of focus at this stage is false productivity. This is the state where you are always engaged, always active, but rarely present. Tasks blend into each other. You respond, adjust, refine, and react, yet there is no sense of completion. The mind stays alert but never sinks into depth. It feels responsible, even impressive from the outside, but internally it produces fatigue rather than satisfaction. Focus is not about being constantly on. It is about entering and exiting periods of intensity with intention. This is where boundaries become essential. Focus requires clear beginnings and clear endings. Without them, attention bleeds into everything and rest becomes contaminated by guilt. When you decide in advance when you will work deeply and when you will stop, another shift happens when you stop relying on motivation as a prerequisite. Motivation is unreliable because it depends on mood, energy, and external circumstances. Focus, at a higher level, becomes a practice independent of how you feel. You sit down not because you are inspired, but because this is the time you chose to show up. This doesn't mean ignoring emotions, it means not letting them dictate behavior. Over time, this consistency generates its own momentum. Motivation becomes a byproduct rather than a requirement. The mind also learns to tolerate silence differently. In the early stages, silence feels empty or uncomfortable, which is why noise and stimulation are so seductive. As focus deepens, silence becomes spacious. It turns into a medium for thinking rather than something to escape from. Ideas connect more naturally. Problems unfold more clearly. You begin to notice nuances you would have missed before. This is not because you became smarter, but because you gave your thoughts room to breathe. With this space comes a new relationship with thinking itself. Instead of chasing thoughts or reacting to them, you observe them. You notice how quickly the mind wants to jump ahead, judge, or conclude. Focus slows this process just enough to introduce choice. You can stay with a question longer. you can explore an idea without rushing to closure. This patience is rare, and it's one of the hidden advantages of sustained attention. As your ability to focus grows, so does your sensitivity to what disrupts it. You become aware not only of obvious distractions, but of subtle leaks, overcommitting, unclear expectations, emotional tension left unresolved. Even certain conversations can drain attention long after they end. This awareness is not meant to make you rigid or isolated. It's meant to help you allocate your energy with more care. Attention is finite, and treating it as such changes how you structure your days. At this level, discipline starts to feel less like control and more like alignment. You are no longer forcing yourself to concentrate against your will. You are choosing to protect what matters. This distinction is important. Control breeds resistance. Alignment breeds cooperation. When your actions reflect your priorities, the mind follows more willingly. Focus becomes an expression of self-trust rather than self-coercion. There is also a noticeable emotional steadiness that emerges. When attention is trained, emotions lose some of their volatility. You still feel them, but they no longer hijack your behavior as easily. This is because focus anchors you in the present moment. Instead of spiraling into imagined futures or replayed pasts, attention returns to what is in front of you. This grounding effect reduces anxiety and increases resilience. Over time, this steadiness changes how you relate to challenges. Difficult tasks no longer feel like threats to your identity. They become puzzles to engage with. Setbacks lose some of their drama. You recover faster because your attention is not scattered across self-criticism or comparison. It stays with the next constructive step. This practical calm is one of the most underrated benefits of focus. Yet there is still a deeper layer waiting to be explored. Focus does not exist in isolation from purpose. When attention is fully developed, it begins to ask for meaning. The question quietly arises, what is all this focus for? Without an answer, even the sharpest attention can feel hollow. With one, it becomes transformative. As you move further into this territory, the challenge is no longer distraction or discipline, but direction. Focus gives you power, but power demands responsibility. What you choose to build, pursue, or dedicate yourself to will shape not just your results, but your inner life. Eventually, when focus has been strengthened and direction has begun to clarify, a more personal question emerges, one that can't be ignored for long. What kind of person are you becoming through the way you use your attention? At this stage, focus is no longer just about performance or output. It becomes a mirror. The patterns of your attention reveal your values, your fears, and your sense of meaning. Where attention goes repeatedly, identity slowly follows. This is where many people experience an unexpected discomfort. With fewer distractions, there is less hiding. When attention is steady, the mind can no longer scatter itself to avoid deeper truths. You start to notice habits that don't align with who you want to be. You notice how often you chase urgency instead of importance, how often you seek approval instead of substance. This awareness can feel heavy at first, but it is also a turning point. You can't change what you refuse to see, and focus brings clarity without judgment. At this level, discipline evolves again. It is no longer primarily about structure or routine, but about integrity. Doing what you said you would do, even when no one is watching. Showing up for the work that matters, even when it doesn't produce immediate recognition. This kind of discipline is quiet and deeply stabilizing. It reduces internal conflict because your actions and intentions are no longer at odds. Focus becomes an expression of personal coherence. One of the most powerful outcomes of this coherence is a sense of internal calm that doesn't depend on circumstances. When attention is no longer constantly pulled outward, you become less reactive to external chaos. News cycles, opinions, and noise lose their emotional grip. You still engage with the world, but you do so on your terms. Your attention is no longer auctioned off to the loudest signal. This selective engagement preserves mental energy and emotional balance. As focus deepens further, the way you experience time continues to change. You become more present, not in a forced or artificial way, but naturally. Moments feel fuller. Conversations become richer. Even simple activities carry more texture. This presence is not mystical, it is the result of attention no longer being divided. Life feels less rushed because you are actually where you are, rather than mentally elsewhere. There is also a growing respect for limits. Earlier, limits were used as tools to protect focus. Now they are recognized as essential features of a meaningful life. You cannot do everything, know everything, or be everywhere. Accepting this is not defeat, it is liberation. When you stop trying to stretch attention beyond its natural capacity, what remains becomes stronger. Focus thrives within realistic boundaries. At this stage, ambition often changes shape. Instead of chasing constant expansion, there is a desire for depth and quality. You care less about doing more and more about doing better. This doesn't mean lowering standards. It means refining them. Focus allows you to see where effort truly pays off and where it simply maintains motion. This discernment saves years of wasted energy. Relationships also begin to reflect this shift. When attention is trained, listening improves. You are less likely to listen while preparing a response or checking out mentally. People feel this difference. Conversations become more grounded, more honest. Focus, applied to relationships, communicates respect without words. It signals that the moment matters. Interestingly, this deeper focus also softens the ego. When you are no longer constantly distracted, there is less need to prove yourself. You become more comfortable with not having an immediate answer, not reacting instantly, not performing. Silence becomes acceptable. Pauses become thoughtful rather than awkward. This quiet confidence is difficult to fake and easy to recognize. Another subtle shift occurs in how you handle uncertainty. Instead of rushing to resolve it, you learn to sit with it. Focus allows you to explore ambiguity without panic. You can hold questions open longer, letting insight emerge gradually. This is especially valuable in complex decisions where premature certainty leads to poor outcomes. Patience becomes a strategic advantage. At this level, focus starts to resemble wisdom more than discipline. It guides not just what you do, but how you see. You become more aware of cause and effect, of how small. Yet even here, the journey is not complete. There is still a final refinement waiting. When focus is stable, purposeful, and aligned with values, it opens the possibility of contribution. Attention is no longer used solely for personal growth or success, but for impact beyond the self. The question shifts again, from who am I becoming, to what am I offering? This is where focus stops being inward, facing and begins to extend outward in a meaningful way. It becomes a tool for service, creation, and legacy. And it is this outward expression of deeply trained attention that reveals the highest potential of focus, the final evolution that brings everything together. When attention finally turns outward, something important changes in how effort is experienced. Work no longer feels like a constant attempt to extract value from the world. Instead, it becomes a way of contributing something coherent, thoughtful, and lasting. Focus, at this level, is not about domination or intensity for its own sake. It is about stewardship. You are taking responsibility for where your attention goes because you understand the ripple effects it creates. This outward orientation reshapes how success is defined. Earlier, progress may have been measured by speed, volume, or visible wins. Now it is measured by quality, relevance, and endurance. You care less about immediate applause and more about whether what you are building will still matter tomorrow. Focus supports this shift by slowing you down just enough to think long term. It encourages choices that compound quietly rather than spike briefly. One of the clearest signs of mature focus is the ability to say no without guilt. Not because you are avoiding effort, but because you understand opportunity cost. Every yes consumes attention that could have been used elsewhere. When this becomes clear, selectivity stops feeling selfish and starts feeling responsible. You protect your focus not just for your own sake, but for the people and projects that depend on the best of you. At this stage, focus also changes how you teach, lead, or influence others. Instead of trying to control outcomes, you model presence. You listen more than you speak. You create space for others to think clearly rather than overwhelming them with urgency. This kind of leadership is subtle, but powerful. It invites depth instead of compliance. People feel steadier around someone whose attention is grounded. There is also a noticeable humility that comes with this level of focus. The more deeply you pay attention, the more you realize how much there is to learn. Certainty softens. Curiosity grows. You become less attached to being right and more interested in understanding. Focus no longer narrows your worldview, it deepens it. It allows complexity without confusion. Another important transformation happens in how effort is paced. Instead of oscillating between overexertion and collapse, you find a rhythm that can be sustained. Focus helps you recognize early signs of depletion and respond before burnout sets in. You stop treating rest as something to be earned and start seeing it as part of the work. This rhythm preserves clarity over long stretches of time. As contribution becomes central, meaning deepens. You begin to see your attention as a form of care. What you focus on grows stronger, more refined, more alive. This applies to ideas, projects, people, and even to yourself. Focus becomes an act of cultivation rather than conquest. It is less about forcing outcomes and more about creating the conditions for them to emerge. This perspective also brings a different relationship with control. You do your best with what is within reach and release what isn't. Focus teaches you where your influence ends. This reduces frustration and increases effectiveness. Energy is no longer wasted on resistance. It is invested where it can actually make a difference. Over time, this approach creates a quiet sense of fulfillment. Not the kind that comes from constant achievement, but the kind that comes from alignment. You feel that your days are coherent, that your effort points in a clear direction. Even when challenges arise, they feel meaningful rather than draining. Focus turns struggle into something purposeful. Eventually, attention becomes so integrated into how you live that it no longer feels like a technique. It feels like a way of being. You notice when focus drifts, and you gently bring it back, without frustration or drama. This gentleness is important. Mastery does not require harshness. It requires consistency and care. What remains at the end of this process is not a superhuman level of productivity, and in that clarity, something simple yet profound becomes evident. The quality of your attention has been shaping your life all along. Now that you see this clearly, the final question is not how to focus, but how you will continue to honor it, day after day, in the ordinary moments where life is actually lived. By the time focus has become woven into daily life, it no longer announces itself. There is no sense of struggle, no dramatic effort to concentrate, no identity built around being disciplined. Attention simply goes where it is needed. This quiet integration is often misunderstood, because from the outside it looks ordinary. But internally, it represents a profound shift. The mind is no longer at war with itself. Energy flows in one direction instead of scattering. What becomes most noticeable at this stage is how differently problems are experienced. Challenges still exist, but they no longer feel overwhelming. Instead of triggering urgency or avoidance, they invite engagement. Focus creates space between the problem and the emotional reaction to it. In that space, intelligence operates more freely. You see options you would have missed before. You respond instead of react. There is also a deeper sense of trust in your own thinking. When attention has been trained over time, you stop second-guessing every decision. Not because you believe you are always right, but because you know you can think things through. You are willing to revise, adjust, and learn, without collapsing into doubt. This self-trust is stabilizing. It allows you to move forward without needing constant reassurance. At this level, focus subtly reshapes how you relate to uncertainty and risk. You no longer feel the need to eliminate uncertainty before acting. You understand that clarity often comes through action, not before it. Focus keeps you engaged with the next step rather than paralyzed by the whole picture. This forward orientation is calm, not rushed. It respects complexity without being intimidated by it. Another quiet change appears in how you consume information. You become more selective, not out of arrogance, but out of care. You notice how much input is unnecessary or even harmful to clear thinking. Focus makes you protective of your mental diet. You choose depth over volume, understanding over opinion, signal over noise. This selectivity preserves clarity in a world that profits from confusion. With this clarity comes a different experience of satisfaction. Instead of chasing peaks of excitement or validation, fulfillment comes from coherence. Your actions make sense in relation to your values. Your time reflects your priorities. There is less internal contradiction. This doesn't mean life becomes easy, but it becomes honest. Effort feels justified. Rest feels earned without guilt. Focus also deepens patience, not as passive waiting, but as active endurance. You stay with long processes without needing constant feedback. You understand that meaningful outcomes often unfold slowly. This patience is increasingly rare, and it quietly sets you apart. It allows you to invest in things others abandon too soon. At this stage, there is often a renewed appreciation for simplicity. You see how easily complexity can be manufactured, and how often it serves as a distraction from what matters. Focus cuts through this. It favors clear questions over clever ones, solid work over impressive gestures. This simplicity is not minimalism for its own sake. It is the natural outcome of knowing what deserves attention and what does not. Even ambition, now, feels lighter. There is still a desire to grow, to contribute, to build something worthwhile, but it is no longer fueled by restlessness. It is grounded. You move toward goals without being consumed by them. Focus keeps ambition from turning into obsession. It maintains balance between striving and being. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all is a sense of presence in your own life. Days no longer blur together as a series of half-remembered tasks. You remember conversations. You remember what you worked on and why it mattered. Time feels lived rather than spent. This presence is not dramatic, but it is deeply satisfying. In the end, focus reveals itself as something far more fundamental than productivity or performance. It is a way of relating to reality. It shapes how you see, how you choose, and how you care. When attention is trained, life becomes less fragmented and more whole. And this is the quiet conclusion everything has been moving toward. Focus was never about becoming superhuman or outworking everyone else. It was about reclaiming your ability to be fully here, to give your mind to what matters. By this point, nothing about focus feels dramatic anymore, and that is precisely how you know it has taken root. There is no constant self-monitoring, no internal narration about being disciplined or productive. Attention moves quietly, almost invisibly, guided by habit and intention rather than force. This stage is less about improvement and more about maintenance, about protecting something fragile and valuable from slow erosion. What becomes clear now is that focus is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is more like physical health. When it's cared for, it supports everything else. When it's neglected, decline happens gradually and often unnoticed. This understanding removes arrogance from the equation. You no longer assume you are immune to distraction. You stay humble and attentive to early signs of drift. Drift rarely announces itself loudly. It shows up as small compromises. A little more noise than necessary. A little less presence than before. A habit of postponing reflection. None of these seem dangerous on their own, but together they weaken the structure you've built. Mature focus recognizes this and responds early, not with punishment, but with correction. You gently return to basics, clear priorities, protected time, honest rest. At this level, rituals become more important than rules. Not rigid systems, but small, repeatable actions that anchor attention. A consistent way of beginning the day. A deliberate transition into deep work. A clear shutdown at the end. These rituals are not about control, they are about continuity. They remind the mind what kind of day this is meant to be. Another quiet realization emerges here. Focus thrives on meaning, but meaning itself evolves. What mattered deeply 5 years ago may not matter in the same way now. Mature focus allows for this without crisis. You reassess, refine, and realign. Attention follows relevance. Holding on to outdated goals out of habit fractures focus just as much as distraction does. There is also a deepening compassion, both toward yourself and others. You understand how hard it is to maintain attention in a world designed to fragment it. This understanding replaces judgment with patience. When focus slips, you don't spiral into self-criticism. You correct course. When others struggle, you don't look down on them. You recognize the shared challenge. This compassion extends inward in an important way. You stop treating yourself as a machine meant to perform endlessly. You listen more closely to signals of fatigue, resistance, and overload. Focus is no longer extracted from yourself, it is invited. This makes it sustainable. You work with your energy instead of against it. At this stage, solitude often becomes more valuable. Not isolation, but intentional time alone with your thoughts. Focus has taught you that clarity often arrives in quiet moments, not busy ones. Solitude becomes a space for integration, where experiences settle and insights connect. It is not an escape from life, but a way of digesting it. There is also a clearer sense of legacy, though it may not be framed in grand terms. You think more about what remains after your effort passes through. Not just outcomes, but influence. The tone you set, the standards you model. Focus shapes these things subtly. How you pay attention teaches others what matters, even without words. As this awareness deepens, urgency loses its grip. You still act decisively, but without panic. You understand that most things do not require immediate reaction. This calm decisiveness is one of the clearest markers of integrated focus. You move when it's time to move, and you wait when waiting is wiser. In the end, focus circles back to something simple. Care. What you pay attention to is what you care about, and how you pay attention reveals how deeply you care. Focus refines this care. It makes it deliberate rather than scattered, steady rather than impulsive. There is no final finish line here. No moment where focus is complete. There is only continued practice, adapted to new seasons, new responsibilities, new questions. But this is not a burden. It is a privilege. To be able to give your attention consciously, in a world that constantly tries to take it, is a quiet form of freedom. And with that freedom comes a calm confidence. At the deepest level, focus stops feeling like something you manage and starts feeling like something you live from. It is no longer an effort layered on top of life, but the lens through which life is experienced. Attention becomes the default state rather than the exception. You are not constantly pulling yourself back to the present, you simply remain closer to it. This doesn't mean the mind never wanders. It still does. The difference is that wandering no longer carries you away for long. There is a quiet awareness running underneath your thoughts, gently noticing when attention drifts and guiding it back without tension. This ease is the result of long familiarity, not perfection. Focus has become a home you know how to return to. At this level, the relationship with achievement changes again. Results still matter, but they are no longer the primary source of meaning. Meaning comes from the quality of engagement itself. You find satisfaction in doing something well, attentively, whether or not it is seen or rewarded. This internal reward system is resilient. It does not collapse when outcomes are delayed or uncertain. There is also a deeper acceptance of limits, including your own. You stop trying to optimize every part of yourself. You recognize that some days will be sharper than others, and you work with what is available. This acceptance does not reduce standards, it stabilizes them. You aim for consistency rather than intensity, presence rather than perfection. Focus at this stage has a calming effect on identity. You are less defined by roles, titles, or comparisons. When attention is grounded, identity loosens. You become more interested in what you are doing than in who you appear to be. This reduces the pressure to perform and increases authenticity. You act from alignment rather than image. One of the most profound shifts is in how you experience silence. It is no longer something to fill or avoid. Silence becomes a companion. It allows insights to surface naturally, without being forced. Some of the clearest understanding arrives not through analysis, but through stillness. Focus makes room for this kind of knowing. As attention settles, gratitude often deepens. Not as a practiced exercise, but as a natural response to presence. You notice details that were previously overlooked. Small moments carry more weight. Focus sharpens perception, and perception enriches experience. Life feels less abstract and more immediate. There is also a greater sense of continuity. Past, present, and future feel more connected. You remember why you started certain paths. You see how today's actions extend into tomorrow. This continuity creates meaning. Focus weaves your efforts into a narrative rather than a series of disconnected events. At this depth, focus becomes inseparable from wisdom. You are not just paying attention, you are understanding what deserves it. You recognize patterns, consequences, and underlying dynamics more easily. Decisions are made with fewer words and less noise. Clarity emerges not from force, but from familiarity with your own mind. Perhaps the most telling sign of all is how little you need to talk about focus anymore. It no longer needs to be named or defended. It shows up in how you listen, how you pause, how you choose. Others may not be able to articulate what feels different, but they sense it. There is a steadiness, a presence, a depth that is unmistakable. This is where the journey quietly rests. Not in a conclusion, but in a way of being that continues to evolve. Focus is no longer a goal to be reached, but a relationship to be maintained. It asks for care, honesty, and renewal, but it gives clarity, calm, and direction in return. And so, without ceremony or final instruction, the circle closes. Attention returns to the simple act of being here. What remains after all the techniques, insights, and shifts have settled is something almost ordinary in appearance, yet rare in practice. Life continues with its demands, its unpredictability, its noise. Nothing external has magically simplified. The difference is internal. Attention no longer collapses under pressure. It bends, adjusts, and returns. Focus has become less about control and more about orientation, knowing where to come back to when things scatter. At this point, you begin to see how attention quietly shapes character. The way you focus determines not only what you do, but how you do it. Careless attention produces careless outcomes. Patient attention produces depth. Over years, this compounds into temperament. Focus becomes ethics in motion, a daily expression of what you consider worthy of your time and energy. There is also a clearer understanding that focus is inseparable from responsibility. When you can pay attention deeply, you can no longer claim ignorance so easily. You see consequences more clearly. You notice when something is drifting off course. This awareness brings a gentle weight. It asks you to respond rather than look away. Focus matures into accountability. Interestingly, this accountability does not make life heavier. It makes it cleaner. Fewer loose ends. Fewer half-kept promises. Fewer internal negotiations. When attention is aligned, decisions simplify. You do not waste energy convincing yourself. You act, adjust, and move on. Mental clutter reduces, and with it, a great deal of unnecessary stress. At this level, focus also influences how you experience failure. Mistakes are no longer identity-threatening. They are information. Because attention is steady, you can examine what went wrong without defensiveness. You learn faster and recover quicker. Focus creates resilience not by preventing failure, but by making it useful. There is a noticeable reduction in performative behavior. You stop doing things primarily to be seen. Attention is no longer scattered across imagined audiences. This privacy of intention is liberating. It allows you to do good work quietly, to care without needing credit, to improve without announcing it. Focus turns effort inward before it ever turns outward. As this inward stability grows, generosity becomes easier. When your attention is not constantly drained, you have more to give. You can be present for others without resentment. You can help without feeling depleted. Focus makes generosity sustainable because it prevents overextension. You give from clarity, not obligation. There is also a refined sense of timing. You act when conditions are right and wait when they are not. You no longer confuse movement with progress. Focus helps you sense when to push and when to pause. This timing often looks like intuition from the outside, but it is really the result of careful attention over time. With this refinement comes peace with incompleteness. You accept that not everything will be resolved, finished, or understood. Some things remain open, and that is acceptable. Focus teaches you that wholeness does not require closure on every front. It requires honesty about where your attention belongs now. As the journey deepens, you may notice that your standards become quieter but firmer. You no longer negotiate away what matters to you, not out of rigidity, but out of respect. Focus has shown you the cost of compromise. You choose alignment over convenience more often, and this consistency builds self-respect. In the end, focus reveals itself as a form of devotion, not to productivity, success, or control, but to presence, to showing up fully for what is in front of you, to giving your best attention where it counts, and withdrawing it where it does not. Nothing about this needs to be dramatic. There is no final transformation, no grand declaration. There is simply the ongoing choice, made quietly and repeatedly, to attend rather than escape. As everything settles into this quieter rhythm, a final understanding begins to surface, not as a conclusion, but as a steady undercurrent. Focus was never meant to separate you from life. It was meant to return you to it. The more refined attention becomes, the less it feels like narrowing and the more it feels like opening. You are not shutting the world out. You are finally meeting it without distortion. At this stage, effort feels clean. There is very little wasted motion. You no longer argue internally about whether you should be doing something. The decision has already been made at a deeper level. Action follows naturally. This inner alignment saves enormous energy, and that energy shows up as calm rather than intensity. You also begin to recognize how rare sustained attention truly is, not in an abstract sense, but in everyday interactions. You notice how often people speak without being heard, how often moments are skimmed instead of experienced. This awareness does not turn into superiority. It turns into care. You become one of the few people who actually stays, listens, and finishes things. This alone creates impact far beyond what most effort ever achieves. Focus now operates less as a tool and more as a standard. You can feel when something falls below it. Shallow commitments, rushed decisions, noisy obligations start to feel uncomfortable, not because they are difficult, but because they dilute clarity. You don't need rules to avoid them. Discomfort does the work for you. Attention naturally withdraws from what weakens it. There is also a growing ease with change. When focus is stable, change is less threatening. You trust your ability to adapt because you trust your attention. You know you can reorient, reassess, and re-engage when circumstances shift. This trust reduces fear of the unknown. You are not clinging to control, you are anchored in presence. Another quiet shift is how you relate to achievement in others. Comparison loses its grip. You can admire without envy, learn without resentment. Focus keeps your attention on your own path, not in isolation, but in clarity. You are informed by others without being pulled off course by them. At this level, focus begins to influence how you experience meaning itself. Meaning is no longer something you search for in big moments or distant goals. It is something that emerges naturally when attention is wholehearted, even small. Actions carry weight when they are done with care. Focus turns the ordinary into something grounded and sufficient. You may also notice a subtle courage developing. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind. The courage to stay with difficulty without fleeing. The courage to say what needs to be said without embellishment. The courage to choose depth in a culture that rewards speed. This courage is a byproduct of attention. When you are present, fear has less room to expand. Eventually, focus becomes indistinguishable from honesty. You see what is there, not what you wish were there. You respond to reality rather than narratives. This honesty simplifies life. It removes drama and replaces it with clarity. Problems become workable. Choices become cleaner. There is nothing left to optimize at this point. No new method to add. No further layer to refine. What remains is practice in its purest form. Paying attention. Returning when it drifts. Choosing again when it matters. And perhaps this is the most important realization of all. Focus was never about becoming more. It was about becoming less scattered. Less divided. Less pulled apart by impulses that were never yours to begin with. In that simplicity, something essential is restored. You find yourself living with fewer regrets, not because you made perfect choices, but because you were actually there for the ones you made. When everything has been said and every layer has been examined, what remains is a quiet, almost invisible shift in how life is met each day. There is no sense of arrival, no finish line crossed. Focus does not end in mastery, it settles into humility. You recognize that attention will always need care, and you accept that without resistance. This acceptance is not resignation, it is maturity. Life continues to test attention in subtle ways. New responsibilities appear, old habits try to return, noise evolves, finding new shapes and channels. But now, these challenges are met from a different place. You are no longer surprised by distraction. You expect it, and because you expect it, it loses much of its power. Awareness arrives before frustration does. At this stage, focus is less about guarding against the world and more about staying rooted within it. You participate fully without being consumed. You stay informed without being overwhelmed. You engage without scattering yourself. This balance is delicate, but it is also deeply human. It allows you to be present without needing to withdraw. There is a growing sense of continuity across your days. Mornings are not disconnected from evenings. Work is not disconnected from rest. Thought is not disconnected from action. Focus weaves these elements together. Life feels less like a series of interruptions and more like a coherent movement. This coherence brings quiet satisfaction. You also become more forgiving of imperfection, especially your own. When attention is steady, mistakes are seen in proportion. They no longer define you, they inform you. This perspective keeps learning alive and ego flexible. Focus supports growth not by demanding flawlessness, but by encouraging honesty. Another subtle outcome is how you experience choice. Choices no longer feel heavy or paralyzing. You decide, act, and adjust. Focus reduces the mental noise that turns decisions into drama. You trust your capacity to respond to consequences, whatever they may be. This trust lightens the weight of decision making. As attention remains trained, you notice that peace is not something to be pursued. It is something that appears when resistance drops. Focus helps remove that resistance. You stop fighting the present moment, whether it is pleasant or difficult. You work with what is there. This cooperation with reality reduces suffering more effectively than any strategy ever could. In conversations, in work, in solitude, there is a consistent tone. You are the same person across contexts. Focus has reduced fragmentation. There is less switching, less performing, less adapting for approval. This consistency is grounding, both for you and for those around you. Toward the end of this long arc, a final insight becomes clear. Attention is not just a resource. It is an expression of love. What you attend to, you nurture. What you ignore, you allow to fade. Focus makes this visible. It asks you, again and again, what you are choosing to care for. There is no pressure in this question, only clarity. Each day offers countless small moments where attention can be given or withheld. Over time, these moments shape a life. Focus does not demand grand gestures. It asks for sincerity in the ordinary. And so, the journey rests where it began, in the simple act of noticing. Noticing where your attention goes. Noticing when it drifts. Noticing when it returns. In this noticing, there is steadiness. In steadiness, there is freedom. Nothing more needs to be added. Nothing needs to be rushed. The practice continues, quietly, in the background of a life. What comes after this point is not an ending, but a settling. Focus no longer feels like something you are developing or refining. It feels like something you are honoring. There is a respect for attention now, the same way one respects time or health, not because it is fragile, but because it is finite. You don't spend it carelessly anymore. Daily life continues to present choices that seem small on the surface. What to read, what to respond to, what to ignore, what to give your best energy to, and what to let pass. These choices no longer feel random. Focus has trained you to sense the weight of them. You understand that attention, given consistently, shapes direction more than any single dramatic decision ever could. There is also a quieter relationship with ambition and desire. You still want things. You still work toward outcomes. But desire no longer pulls you out of yourself. It doesn't fracture your attention into longing and dissatisfaction. Focus keeps you grounded in effort rather than fantasy. You invest in what can be built, not in what can be imagined endlessly. One of the most subtle changes is how you experience waiting. Waiting used to feel like wasted time, something to fill or escape. Now it feels neutral, sometimes even useful. Focus allows you to stay present without needing constant stimulation. Waiting becomes a space for observation, reflection, or simple rest. This alone changes the texture of life. You also become more precise with words, not because you are trying to sound thoughtful, but because focus has reduced internal noise. When the mind is clear, language follows. You say less, but what you say carries more weight. Silence becomes part of communication, not an absence of it. There is an increasing alignment between inner and outer life. What you value internally shows up more clearly in how you spend your time. There are fewer contradictions. You don't have to justify your choices as much, either to yourself or to others. Focus has simplified your explanations by simplifying your priorities. At this depth, even setbacks feel different. They are still disappointing, sometimes painful, but they do not destabilize you. Focus keeps your sense of self anchored. You can absorb difficulty without losing direction. Recovery is faster, not because you are tougher, but because you are less scattered. Another quiet outcome is that joy becomes less conditional. It no longer depends on perfect circumstances. It appears in moments of absorption, when attention is fully engaged. This kind of joy is calm and steady. It doesn't spike and crash. It lingers. You may also notice a growing comfort with not knowing. Focus has shown you that clarity does not require certainty. You can move forward thoughtfully even when the full picture isn't visible. This reduces anxiety and increases courage. You act with care, not with panic. At this point, focus has completed its deepest work. It has returned you to yourself, not as an isolated individual, but as someone grounded enough to engage with life fully. You are not constantly pulled away from the present, nor are you clinging to it. You are participating in it. There is nothing left to explain or defend. The practice speaks for itself in how you live, how you listen, how you choose. Focus has become quite integrity, expressed daily. And so, without ceremony, the movement continues. Attention is given. It drifts. It returns. At this final depth, focus feels less like a skill and more like a companion that has been walking beside you all along. It doesn't push, demand, or instruct. It simply stays. There is a sense of ease in this presence, as if effort has softened into understanding. Attention is no longer something you summon. It is something you trust. The world, of course, has not become quieter. Distraction still exists in countless forms, clever and persistent, but it no longer feels personal. You don't experience it as an attack on your discipline or a failure of character. It is simply part of the environment. And like weather, it is acknowledged without being obeyed. Focus allows you to respond rather than react. At this stage, your inner life has a different texture. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer dominate. They pass through more freely. There is space between them. This space is not emptiness, it is clarity. From it, decisions feel simpler and actions feel cleaner. You are less entangled in your own mind. There is also a deep acceptance of rhythm. Some days carry more energy, others less. Focus does not demand uniform performance. It adapts. You give what you have without resentment. This adaptability preserves long-term strength. It prevents the cycles of overexertion and collapse that once felt unavoidable. Your relationship with effort has matured. Effort is no longer proof of worth. It is simply what is required at times. You work when it is time to work, and you rest when it is time to rest. Focus keeps these two in balance. Neither is rushed, neither is avoided. At this depth, presence reveals a subtle richness in ordinary life. Small tasks feel complete when they are done with care. Conversations feel fuller when you are truly listening. Even solitude carries a sense of connection rather than emptiness. Focus sharpens experience without intensifying it. There is also a quiet reconciliation with the past. Because attention is grounded in the present, regrets lose their edge. You can remember without reliving, reflect without rumination. Focus allows memory to inform rather than imprison. This brings a gentle peace. Looking ahead, the future feels less like a source of anxiety and more like an unfolding path. You don't need to see far. Focus teaches you that clarity appears step by step. You trust the process of paying attention and responding honestly. That trust reduces fear. At this level, the distinction between doing and being begins to blur. Action arises naturally from presence. You are not forcing yourself into motion, nor are you withdrawing from life. You are participating in it with awareness. This integration is quiet and complete. If there is any final understanding, it is this. Attention is not something you use to control life. It is how you meet it. Focus is not about narrowing your world, but about entering it fully, without fragmentation. Nothing more needs to be added to this understanding. It is lived, not explained. The practice continues in small, ordinary moments, unnoticed by most, yet shaping everything. And in that ongoing practice, what unfolds beyond this point is not a new lesson, but a quiet continuation. Focus has dissolved into the background of life so completely that it no longer feels like something separate from you. It doesn't announce itself, and it doesn't demand recognition. It simply shows up in the way you move through your days, steady and unremarkable, yet deeply intentional. There is a growing sense that nothing needs to be forced anymore. You don't push yourself into attention, and you don't pull yourself away from distraction with guilt. When something matters, you naturally give it space. When something doesn't, you let it pass. This discernment feels intuitive now, but it was earned through patience and repeated return. At this stage, the mind feels less crowded. Not empty, but ordered. Thoughts arise, but they are no longer competing for dominance. They take turns. This internal order creates a subtle confidence, not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of stability. You know that whatever arises can be met without panic. You also notice how differently you experience pressure. Deadlines, expectations, and responsibilities still exist, but they no longer compress your attention into anxiety. Focus distributes pressure more evenly. You deal with what is in front of you rather than imagining everything at once. This keeps stress from accumulating unnecessarily. There is a refined relationship with desire. You still feel ambition and curiosity, but they no longer fragment you. Desire informs direction without hijacking presence. You want things without needing them to validate you. Focus has created enough inner ground that wanting does not turn into restlessness. One of the quiet gifts at this depth is a sense of sufficiency. Not complacency, but contentment. You feel that your attention is being used well. This doesn't mean every day is productive or meaningful in obvious ways. It means that, over time, your energy aligns with what you value. That alignment brings a calm satisfaction that doesn't need explanation. You may also notice that you are less reactive to other people's urgency. When others rush, panic, or demand immediate response, you don't automatically match their pace. Focus allows you to pause just long enough to choose your response. This pause is powerful. It protects clarity and prevents emotional contagion. There is also a growing tolerance for complexity. You don't rush to simplify things just to feel relief. You can hold multiple perspectives without confusion. Focus allows you to stay present with nuance, which leads to wiser decisions. You see that clarity often emerges from patience, not speed. At this stage, attention has reshaped how you experience effort itself. Effort no longer feels like resistance against yourself. It feels like cooperation. You work with your limits instead of denying them. This cooperation makes sustained effort possible without resentment. Even moments of distraction feel different now. When attention drifts, you notice without judgment and return without delay. There is no story attached. No self-criticism. Just a quiet correction. This gentleness keeps the system intact. If there is a final maturity here, it is the understanding that focus does not need to be dramatic to be powerful. Its strength lies in consistency. In showing up again and again, quietly, without needing recognition. Over time, this consistency shapes not just work, but character. Life continues, as it always has, with uncertainty and change. But within that movement, attention remains steady. It doesn't cling. It doesn't scatter. It stays responsive. And so the journey doesn't end. It simply blends into living. At this point, focus has become so integrated that it feels almost transparent. You don't think about it, manage it, or evaluate it. It expresses itself naturally through how you respond to life. There is a sense of quiet fluency in your attention, the way a practiced musician no longer thinks about technique while playing. The effort has dissolved into ease. What stands out most now is how little inner friction remains. Decisions no longer require prolonged debate. You sense what matters, act accordingly, and move on. This doesn't mean decisions are careless or rushed. They are simply clean. Focus has removed much of the unnecessary mental resistance that once complicated simple choices. You also notice how differently you experience interruptions. They still happen, but they no longer derail you. You can shift attention briefly and return without losing depth. This flexibility is important. It shows that focus is no longer brittle. It bends without breaking. You are not rigidly protecting attention, you are comfortably inhabiting it. At this depth, there is an increasing sense of inner order. Not control, but coherence. Thoughts, emotions, and actions align more often than not. When they don't, the misalignment is noticed quickly and corrected gently. Focus acts as a regulating force, keeping the system balanced. There is also a growing appreciation for restraint. You speak less impulsively. You act with more consideration. Not because you are suppressing yourself, but because focus has slowed the moment just enough for wisdom to enter. This restraint feels natural, not restrictive. Another subtle shift is how you relate to success and failure. Neither inflates nor diminishes you. Focus has anchored your sense of worth in engagement rather than outcome. You take responsibility for your effort and release attachment to results. This detachment is not indifference. It is clarity. Time itself begins to feel different. You are less aware of it passing because you are more fully inside each moment. Hours spent in attention feel meaningful, whether they are productive or reflective. Time is no longer something to be managed aggressively. It is something to be inhabited. You may also notice a deeper respect for beginnings and endings. You start things deliberately and finish them cleanly. This respect creates psychological closure and reduces mental residue. Focus keeps tasks from lingering unfinished in the background of your mind. At this stage, learning becomes more natural and less forced. You absorb information more deeply because attention is undivided. You connect ideas across time. Understanding accumulates. This learning feels organic, not pressured. What remains most striking is the absence of urgency. You still move decisively, but without haste. Focus has removed the constant feeling of being behind. You trust that what needs to be done will be done in its time. There is nothing left to chase here, no higher state to reach. Focus has returned you to something basic and enduring: presence, care, clarity. Life continues to unfold with all its complexity, but within it, attention remains steady. You meet each moment as it comes, not perfectly, but honestly. And in that honesty, there is a quiet completeness that needs no further refinement.